Why the Minnesota Timberwolves are shocking everyone. Over the last 5 or so seasons, it just seemed like the Minnesota Timberwolves were one of those organizations that could just never get anything right. Whatever trade they ended up making, whatever draft picks they ended up making, it just seemed like things didn't necessarily go in their favor. And even if they got players via the draft or in free agency that turned out to be very good individual players, it just seemed like in terms of overall success, there wasn't all that much of that over the last 5 or so seasons. But when you look at what the Timberwolves are doing so far during this young NBA season, they're playing extremely well. They have a 10-3 record and they're currently the first seed in the West, but even besides their record, when you watch these guys play out there, it's pretty clear that there's something different going on in Minnesota than what we've seen from them in the past. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. When you look at this Minnesota Timberwolves roster, over the last 3 or so seasons, it's pretty clear there's been a lot of talent on it. Whether you talk about their top guys in Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, some other guys as well, it's pretty clear, at least in terms of their top 2 players in Edwards and Towns, that the Timberwolves actually did have enough talent in order to be a team that consistently made the playoffs, but also be a team that had some level of success once they made it to the playoffs as well. But of course, as I mentioned before in the video, over the more recent history, the Timberwolves just weren't able to be all that successful. And their issues come down to a couple different factors, whether you talk about injuries to their main guys or key players, whether you talk about coaching issues, whether you talk about just overall bad play. The Timberwolves have definitely been plagued with a lot of different issues over the years that really hindered their potential success. But when you look at what the Timberwolves are able to do this season, they actually have had a ton of success. Now, of course, it has been extremely early on into the season, but I think virtually nobody expected that around 15 games through the season that the Timberwolves would be the #1 seed in the Western Conference. And due to that, a question that some of you may be having at this point is why? Why are the Timberwolves able to be so successful this season as compared to in years past, especially considering that their overall roster is relatively similar this year to what it was last year and even the season prior to that? Well, in my opinion, I think it comes down to a couple different factors, but the first factor that I want to touch upon is the fact that everybody's buying in. Because typically when you talk about teams that underperform, whether you talk about teams that have a ton of talent on the roster and don't live up to their expectations, or just a team that doesn't perform in general, usually what that comes down to is players just don't buy into what the coach is selling. And I think last season and even prior to that, I think that was one of the bigger issues that the Timberwolves really had. But when you look at what Minnesota is able to do this season, I think their players are doing a much better job at buying into what the coach is selling. I think they're doing a much better job at running the pick and roll offense. I think they're doing a much better job at running plays a little bit more effectively, getting guys easy looks, whether you talk about the catch and shoot 3-point jump shot, whether you talk about cutting backdoor for wide open dunks or layups. I think overall, when you look at their offense this season as compared to in years past, it's clearly significantly better. And even defensively, I think the Timberwolves are doing a significant better job this year than they were doing in the past, and that really comes down to a couple things. It comes down to the fact that the players are just doing a better job at buying in, but most importantly, it comes down to coaching. Although the Timberwolves have had the same coach for a couple years at this point, I think this season Coach Finch is doing a much better job at getting everybody to buy in than he really did in the past. Now, of course, there were some other factors that led to the lack of success for Minnesota, but overall, I do think this is a huge factor for why Minnesota is playing a lot better this season so far early on into the season than they were playing like in the past. Now, the next factor for why I think the Timberwolves are having a lot more success this season as compared to in years past is due to the fact that they're able to stay relatively healthy. Because when you look at some of the Timberwolves' main guys over the past couple seasons, they've not really done a great job at staying all that healthy. Like, for example, when you talk about one of their main guys, their second best player in Karl Anthony Towns, he wasn't able to do a good job at staying healthy last season, as he only played 29 games. And when you lose your second best player for more than half of the season, it's going to be really difficult to have all that much success. Because of course, when he's not out there on the court, you lose a significant piece, but even when he does come back from injury, you don't have him rhythm for all that long, and it's just very difficult to get a rhythm going with one of your better players on your roster. But even besides Towns, they had some other guys that missed significant time, and overall there was just too much turnover within the Minnesota Timberwolves roster due to injuries last season and really in seasons past, and I think that was a huge reason for why they weren't able to have all that much success in the past. But when you look at what they're able to do this season, there hasn't really been that same turnover. All their guys have stayed relatively healthy, and they've done a really nice job in training camp and building upon that so far early on into the season at just building a really nice camaraderie, chemistry that comes from just playing together. And the fact that these guys are staying healthy makes it even easier to build that chemistry together. And I really do think that's a huge reason for why we're seeing a lot more success from this Timberwolves roster. But the next reason for why I think the Timberwolves are playing significantly better this year than they were in the past is due to the improvement of Anthony Edwards. Now, when you talk about Anthony Edwards, really ever since he made it to the NBA, it's pretty clear he was just one of those guys that was an extremely talented player right away, and he was doing a great job at putting up crazy individual statistics to back that up. But when you look at what Edwards is able to do this season, it's pretty clear there is improvement there from what he was able to do in the past. Like for example, this season he's averaging almost 26 points per game on 5.9 boards and 5.1 assists. Now when you compare those numbers to what he was able to do last year, where he averaged around 25 points per game on 5.8 boards and 4.4 assists, it doesn't necessarily look like it's all that different, but when you watch him out there in the court, I think there's two main areas for where Edwards has gotten significantly better. I think A, he's a little bit more efficient now than he was in years past, but more importantly, B, he's doing a much better job at facilitating out there. Because I mentioned in a lot of my videos, whenever you have star players or just guys that are extremely talented offensively, it's extremely important that those guys have at least somewhat of a level of playmaking within their game. Because when those guys are going off individually offensively, teams are going to start to double or triple team them. But if they have the ability and capability to find open guys, it just makes it that much more difficult for defenses to play these type of players. And I think when you're talking about Anthony Edwards, as the years have been progressing, but especially this season, he's done a significantly better job at finding guys. Whether you talk about running the pick and roll, whether you talk about running their offense in general, it seems like Edwards this season, more so than ever in the past, is doing a better job at finding guys wide open for looks for catch and shoot 3-point jump shots or cutting backdoor for wide open dunks or layups. And as I mentioned before, I just think that makes this offense that much more dangerous, and it just promotes more and more winning basketball. So I definitely think Anthony Edwards is also a huge reason for the success that we've been seeing from Minnesota this season as compared to in years past. But overall, I am extremely excited to see the success that the Timberwolves are having. Although I will say that in the past, I thought the Timberwolves have had pretty decent rosters and pretty talented ones and should have been more successful. At the same time, I didn't necessarily expect this whatsoever. I didn't expect them to be this good and have this level of success. And going forward throughout the rest of this season and going into the playoffs, hopefully the Timberwolves are able to stay relatively healthy, and hopefully they're able to keep up a similar level of play to what we've been seeing from them so far in the early part of the season. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening for the Minnesota Timberwolves, not only this season, but also in the long-term future as well. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Timberwolves have a chance to be successful going forward throughout the rest of this season, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.